Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is a package that comes from Castlemania Games. My buddy Ryan sent this to me for free for review purposes, so full disclosure. A lot of people have been asking me to do a video on this, so thanks to Ryan, we have that option. So if you want to thank him, please check out his website, Castlemania Games. There will be a link in the description. I've done reviews and stuff on that website before, on all the game products from there, and it's a solid website. He sells a lot of cool stuff, and hell of a nice guy. So hopefully you'll check it out. So thank you very much to Castlemania Games. Now, onward, let's take a look at the actual product. What we have inside, like I said, a lot of people have been asking me to do a video about this, so I'm glad I can finally do it. It is, let's see here if I can get past stuff inside. Well, okay, there's a sticker from Castlemania Games. Thank you, Ryan, for throwing that in there. And then there is the device itself. This is the HD link cable for the Dreamcast by a company called Pound. Now, I'm sure a lot of you, especially in the Dreamcast community, have heard of this thing by now, but still, people ask me to cover it, so we're going to do that. Now, in short, what this is exactly what it sounds like. It's a link cable you connect to your Dreamcast, and then you use the HDMI output of the device to connect it to a TV or monitor, and then therefore you can use the Dreamcast in high definition, at least in concept. So we're going to do a few things. First, I'm going to talk about why this thing will, without having even used it, as you can see it's brand new, haven't touched it, I can already tell you it's going to have certain quirks to it that you should understand before you proceed to buy it or buy anything very similar to it. Then we'll talk about the actual device after I've tested it and see what I think of it and all that stuff, as opposed to its competition. So first and foremost, the first thing you need to know, of course, is that Sega included VGA compatibility back in 1998 when they first released the Dreamcast in Japan. All models of the Dreamcast contain it. Now, VGA compatibility originally was more of a bonus feature, allowing people to connect their Dreamcast to PC monitors so that they could have higher resolution gameplay. It'll have basically 480p signals, as opposed to the standard 480i that you were getting out of, say, composite or S-Video or even RGB. And it looked really great, it's just that it wasn't really as practical at the time. Of course, as time has gone on, people want access to those higher resolution modes so you can get better gameplay options. Now, I've done videos on this subject for years. I mean years, like going all the way back to when I first started my channel, like back in '09. So there's been a whole host of different VGA boxes out there. And you know, you could do direct VGA connections to get access to the signal. You could use various converter boxes, which I was doing at one point. But now, in 2018, and I believe the first one on the market was the Akura last year in 2017. Since then, we now have more efficient and practical options where you can simply use an HDMI cable, which is much, much nicer. However, there is a really big quirk to all of this. Now, all of these cables work the same way in that they're just trying to get access to that VGA signal. They're not doing anything else. None of these do upscaling. None of them modify in any way. They're just taking the VGA signal, the 480p signal they're receiving, and they're just outputting it straight up. So first of all, before we get into anything else, make sure your monitor can support 480p through HDMI. Not all of them can, most of them can, but it's something you would want to know in advance, otherwise this thing would not work for you. The other thing that's like the really important thing to note is not every Dreamcast game supports VGA mode. That means if you have a game that doesn't support VGA mode, it's not going to work with this device, at least not initially. So that's what we're going to get into now. The Dreamcast has just shy of around 800 games, and that includes independent releases. It includes all the Japanese exclusives, all the European exclusives, all the American exclusives, and then of course all the games that were released across all platforms or in certain regions together. You get what I'm saying. There's around 800 games is basically my point. Now, of those, the vast majority of them will support VGA right out of the box, won't need anything special, meaning you take, a game in that's compatible, put in your Dreamcast, you have this in, boom, you're good. But there are some exceptions. In fact, there's around 100 exceptions, which sounds really high, but it's not as bad as it sounds. You actually have to slash that in half because there's a bit of an asterisk next to each group. One group of games, about 50 titles, are not natively compatible but will still work. And what that basically means is there's a bunch of games that for some reason, I don't know whose decision this was at the time, how this worked exactly, but basically the long and the short of it is there's a bunch of games where they will not natively boot up in VGA. You will attempt to and it will say it will not work. However, they still have the ability to run in VGA, they just need to be forced into it. Now they can be forced into it through a few different methods. There's either the hardware method or the software method. Now the hardware method has a couple of brain branching tree-like options where you disconnect and reconnect and all this shit you don't need to do anymore. But the best option is if you look at the competitors of this device, specifically the Bahar Bros, who I've done videos on their devices. I've done the Akura, I've done the Gecko. Each one of them includes a hardware option for those 50 odd games, where it will have the option to switch out of VGA mode into what's called RGB mode. Now, you can't actually display through RGB mode, but keeping it in RGB mode means the Dreamcast will be tricked into starting the game. Once it gets to a certain point, you flick it over to VGA, and then the game will be tricked into running into VGA mode, so you'll get the native 480p resolution. You're essentially just kind of providing the force boot, is basically all you're really doing there. Now, that's important to note on the hardware side of things because its competitors do that. This particular cable does not have any sort of hardware solution. So if you have one of those 50 games, you can't do that. So well, what do you do? Well, there's a software option, as I mentioned before. And that's actually, to be honest with you, the one I always recommend to people. There's a disc called Codebreaker. Now, if you take that disc, it was designed as a cheat disc, like a Game Shark type of thing, but don't use Game Shark, use Codebreaker, specifically Codebreaker. Now, that particular disc, while you can use it to load cheats and all that kind of stuff, that's never what I do with it. What I do with it is I'll put that into a Dreamcast first. It will boot up that disk, and it will get to the moment where it's like, do you want to put in codes? You just say no, and you start up, you go to the next sequence where it says, okay, please insert the next disk. That's when you actually would take one of these non-VGA compatible titles, put it in there, close it, and then it will proceed to add the VGA code or whatever magical bullshit it needs to do, and then you'll proceed to have the game displaying in 480p on your television. That would be necessary for this cable. I want to make sure everybody out there understands that, because this does not have hardware capability to force boot those games. So what that means is, around 700 of the Dreamcast titles, you pop it in with this thing, you're not going to have any problems. About 50 of them are going to require the process I just described, and then another 50 or so straight up aren't going to happen at all. A game one such example would be Air Force Delta by Konami. That game, no matter what you do, you cannot run it with any sort of VGA device for the Dreamcast. This would be included in that list. Again, the list is in the description. Feel free to read it. There will also be some oddities depending on your region. One such example is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Cool game, released by Capcom, available in Japan, Europe, and North America for the Dreamcast. In all three cases, does not support VGA mode, which is unfortunate. However, in Japan, late in the Dreamcast life, the game was re-released and called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for Matching Service. For Matching Service was Sega's way of saying for online matches. It was kind of a literal translation. That was its purpose. However, to their credit, they added VGA code back into it. So if you have that version of the game, you can actually use VGA compatibility, which means it would work with this device. Then there's other oddities where certain regions just got completely screwed for no apparent reason. Skies of Arcadia is one such example. In Japan and in North America, that version uses VGA right out of the box. However, in Europe, it doesn't. Australia, it doesn't. Why? I don't know. But that means the Australian and European versions would not work with this. Do you understand? Again, the list is in the description. If you're confused, feel free to go there. So hopefully everybody is up to speed on what is required or what is to be understood before using a cable like this. So that said, let's talk about the specifics of this actual cable. Right, yes, we're finally there. So this particular one, like I mentioned slightly earlier, its immediate competitors would be the Bahar Bros and the two that they've released. Now, in that case, that means there's three Dreamcast HDMI cable options out there. The Akura would be kind of the Rolls-Royce one, where it has multiple extra features on it, and it gives you a direct one-to-one signal of the console, while also giving you the ability to have force booting, to have scan lines, to change the thickness of the scan lines, and I believe there's a vibrancy mode you can turn on or off. The Gecko, which is actually the way I use the Dreamcast, was a stripped down version of that just left the hardware, the VGA boot mode in there and made it a little bit smaller. This would be the next step down where it doesn't have that. Obviously it's made by a different company entirely, but its advantage is that it's much cheaper than the alternatives. Now, does that pay off? I don't know. We're going to test that out, but we are going to open it up at this point and just kind of take a look at it. So cutting into the box here, lifting it up. Inside it has a nice thank you note from them, from Pound Technology, and then it has the cable itself in a nice little bag, and then just, you know, of course the box has some information about it, but, you know, nothing else you're really going to need to know that I haven't really already said. So let's take it out of this bag here, and inside you see that, well, it is what it is. It's just a Dreamcast HDMI cable. Now, this does lack a feature that the Xbox version of this, which I'll be doing a video on that at some point. The Xbox version has an additional feature that I wish this one had. So basically here you see one end of this is for the Dreamcast and the other end is the HDMI end. And then this middle part is basically the magic box that's doing all the work. It's taking the VGA signal, converting it through an HDMI output, and then sending it out to the cable. The Xbox version of this actually isn't hardwired like this one is. This one, in theory, if you were to damage this part of the cable, the thing is a brick. Whereas the Xbox version, they didn't do that. They left a port on here so you could take it out and then replace the cable either with a higher grade cable, or in the event you damage the cable, or if you wanted to connect something like the M cable to it, then you could do that. The M cable I did a separate video on is a very high grade fancy HDMI cable with a processor in it that creates an anti-aliasing effect. It looks beautiful with the Sega Dreamcast. And I've done, like I said, did a video on it. In fact, that's how I use my Dreamcast, is I have the Gecko connected to the Dreamcast and the M cable connected to that, and it's amazing. So this thing is in an immediate disadvantage because it can't do that unless you use some sort of switch box that's actually M cable compatible, but that's a different thing. So since it doesn't have that, it's limited to exactly this. So we're gonna test it out and see how else it fares. I like the look of it, I like the simplicity of it. So I've been using this for a while and it's time for final thoughts. Yes, I even kept the little strap things on there because my Dreamcast is close enough to the TV, it was totally doable. Yeah, I gotta be honest with you, I wish I had better news to report. The thing works fine as far as reliability. The first time I connected it, I actually didn't get a signal out of it, but that was on my end. The Dreamcast is notoriously finicky. It's AV out port. You have to have a really tight connection. A lot of time, even when you think it's in, it's not. So that happened in this case. At first I couldn't get any sort of response out of it, but once I pressed it in a little harder, it worked fine. So that's not a fault of the cable, it's just how the Dreamcast is. But that's kind of where it ends. The picture quality off of this thing, to be honest with you, is really not very good. It's better than composite or S-Video or even RGB. That one might be debatable to some purists, but to me, it offers a VGA signal that has a lot of additional noise in the signal, resulting in a very dulled and, you know, not very nice image. It's not awful. I've definitely seen, like I said, there's different ways that are worse, but as far as all VGA competitors, it's got to be the bottom of the barrel. Certainly the HDMI competitors, of which, like I said, there's only 3 of them, and this is the worst of the 3. I don't know about the longevity of this thing. Again, I just got it, as you can tell. I don't know. That's another thing where, again, if they had future-proofed that, at least one half of it would have been better, because HDMI cables don't last forever. I don't know how cheap this one is, but my guess is it's probably not gonna last super long either, which is really unfortunate. I would love to give you guys like great news here. Say, oh yeah, 25 bucks, this solves all your problems, but I can't say that. Knowing full well that, like, if you use the Gecko, which doesn't have any of these problems, you're not going to run into this issue. And of course, with that one, you can upgrade it, you know, using better HDMI cables or even things like the M cable to give you much better picture. I'll show you some examples here. Like, you can see that I've got this cable running, and it's not, again, it's not like it doesn't work. It's just giving you additional noise that's not supposed to be there, resulting in a worse image. And to be honest with you, I mean, I'm not going to tell anyone out there what their budget is or what to do with their money or anything like that, but for my money, I would say you could get 2 of these for the price of a Gecko, but the Gecko offers you more than twice as good of an image, if that makes any sense, if you follow my math on that. I would say if you're like, hey man, I really want to upgrade my Dreamcast, I don't quite have the money, I wouldn't say just jump into this. I would say wait a little longer and do it the right way. Get the Gecko, maybe even eventually get the M cable. That's a different entity altogether, but at least even without the M cable to do additional benefits to it, the Gecko at least and the Akura just offer a straight pass through. This introduces issues that do not exist in other cables. And it's really unfortunate. And it's too bad because they clearly have like talented engineers over there. So I hope that they do another revision of this where even if you don't change anything else, you don't make this cable replaceable or whatever, at the very least, don't introduce errors into the video signal that don't exist there naturally. Pardon the interruption here, guys. Just a small little change, a little note I had to address. At the time I'm editing this, I just found out that there actually is a revision 2 of this cable now in existence. So the revision 2 I do not have. I have not been able to test. I don't know if it solves the video problems, but by just looking at it, you can see they did solve the other one. It now supports the ability to swap in your own HDMI cable, so it does include those benefits now. But then again, like I said, haven't used it, so I don't know if the video quality options are improved. If I acquire one of those cables, I will revisit it and do another video. Yeah, I'm sorry. For $25, that's the only advantage it's got over the other cables, is that it's the cheapest one. But cheap things often are cheap for a reason, and I'm sad to say. So yeah, unfortunately, I really wish I could recommend this, but I can't. For my money, get yourself a Gecko, and if you can, get yourself an M cable to go along with it. Now, I'm sure somebody will ask, like, well, what if, you could put an M cable with this thing or whatever? What if you could rig that up somehow? All you would be doing is creating an anti-aliasing effect for an already dulled image. The native image is vibrant and colorful and pops. This does not. So all you do is be smoothing out a dulled image. So you're just kind of band-aiding a different problem, if that makes any sense. So yeah, and even, of course, if you're the kind of person who can get an M cable, why would you do this when really for only a little bit more you could get a better solution? So yeah, I invite Pound to try this again and hopefully make a better product. And in the future, maybe I can then recommend it. But this cable, this particular one, I'm sad to say that I cannot. However, if you want to check it out, or if you want to check out anything else, feel free to follow the link in the description to Castlemania Games. And thank you very much to Ryan at Castlemania Games for hooking me up with this. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you all later.